In 1718, French engineers stood at a bend in the Mississippi River and made a decision that defied all logic. They would build a city on a swamp, below sea level, trapped between a restless river and a vast lake. Over the next century, New Orleans would burn to the ground, drown under floodwaters, and fight through waves of disease that killed thousands. But it never died. So, I used AI to rebuild that era, street by street, disaster by disaster. Make sure to stick until the end. The site they chose was almost laughable. Cypress swamp stretched in every direction. The ground was soft, saturated, and barely a few feet above the river. Mosquitoes bred in the standing water by the millions. And yet this was the place, the Crescent City, because the river bend gave French traders direct access to the Gulf of Mexico and the entire interior of North America. The first buildings were wooden, thrown up quickly along the highest natural ridge they could find. Streets were mud. The only thing keeping the river out was a hand-built earthen levee just 3 feet high, 3 feet of packed dirt holding back one of the largest rivers on Earth. It was never going to be enough. But before the river had its chance to strike, something else came for the city first, something faster. It was Good Friday, March 21st, 1788. A candle caught a curtain in a home on Chartres Street. Within hours, the fire had consumed 856 of the roughly 1,100 buildings in New Orleans. Nearly the entire city, gone. All that wooden construction, all those narrow streets. They had built a tinderbox, and a single flame lit the match. If that was the end of the story, New Orleans would be a footnote. But it wasn't. The Spanish colonial government, which controlled Louisiana at the time, imposed strict new building codes. No more wood. Every structure had to be brick, thick brick walls covered in stucco, tile roofs instead of wooden shingles, buildings pushed to the property line with carriageways leading into hidden courtyards, and the iron, hand-forged wrought iron balconies that would become the visual signature of the entire city. In 1794, fire struck again, destroying another 212 buildings. But this time, the city was already changing. The Spanish rebuild gave New Orleans its bones. The French Quarter we recognize today was born from those ashes. What the Spanish couldn't know was that the next threat wasn't coming from inside the city. It was coming from the river they had tried so hard to tame. The Mississippi River doesn't just flow, it pushes. Every spring, snow melt from as far north as Montana surged downstream and the river rose. The levees, still built by hand, by enslaved laborers, and later by immigrant workers with wheelbarrows and shovels, were the city's only defense. Each time the river broke through, the city rebuilt the levee higher. 3 feet became 6, 6 became 12. It was an arms race against nature, and nature kept raising the stakes. On May 3, 1849, a sugar planter named Pierre Sauvé watched the Mississippi tear through his levee 17 miles upriver from the city. The breach sent a wall of water cascading toward New Orleans. People rowed boats down streets that had been dry the day before. It took weeks for the water to recede. The city had survived the fire. It had survived the flood. But even as the last puddles dried in the summer heat, a new killer was already breeding in those waters. And this one couldn't be stopped with brick or levees. By the mid-1800s, New Orleans was one of the wealthiest cities in America, and one of the deadliest. 80% of streets remained unpaved as late as 1880. Gutters and drainage canals overflowed with garbage, food waste, and human filth. Every rainfall turned streets into swamps, and in that standing water, mosquitoes bred by the millions. Those mosquitoes carried yellow fever, and yellow fever killed with terrifying speed. The 1853 epidemic alone claimed roughly 8,000 lives. To put that in perspective, nearly 1 out of every 15 people in the city dead in a single summer. Bodies were carted away so quickly that families couldn't hold funerals. The cemeteries, already built above ground because graves were filled with water, couldn't keep up. The problem was engineering. The city sat below the water table. Rainwater had nowhere to drain. Every cistern, every backyard puddle, every open gutter was a breeding ground. New Orleans needed a sewerage system, but digging underground in a city below sea level was a problem nobody had solved. The answer wouldn't come from politicians. It would come from a local engineer who saw the problem differently from everyone else. While the city waited for a drainage miracle, New Orleanians adapted their homes in ways that were quietly brilliant. Two building types emerged that you still see across the city today. The Creole cottage is built low to the ground, but with steep roofs and thick masonry walls. These homes use thermal mass to stay cool in the brutal summer heat. Floor-to-ceiling windows and transoms above every door caught whatever breeze existed. Then came the shotgun house, narrow, just 12 feet wide, with doors aligned perfectly from front to back. Open the front door and the back door, and the breeze would sweep straight through. It was air conditioning, 150 years before air conditioning existed. Both styles sat on raised brick piers, sometimes 3 or 4 feet high. When the streets flooded, the water passed underneath. Life continued above. The architecture wasn't just beautiful, it was survival, engineered into every wall and every window. But these homes still sat in a city that couldn't drain. They could rise above the flood, but they couldn't escape the mosquitoes. The city needed more than clever houses. It needed a machine. In the 1890s, New Orleans finally began constructing a real drainage system. Canals were dug, steam-powered pumps were installed. But the real breakthrough came from a young engineer named Albert Baldwin Wood. Wood was born and raised in New Orleans. He graduated from Tulane. He understood the problem intimately because he had lived it his entire life. And in 1913, he designed something that changed the city forever. The wood screw pump, a massive, low-lift axial flow pump built from cast iron. At 12 feet in diameter, and later 14 feet, wood screw pumps could move water at a volume no other pump in the world could match. These pumps sat inside brick pumping stations that looked more like monuments than industrial buildings. For the first time in its history, New Orleans could control its own water. The swamp receded. New neighborhoods opened. The city expanded outward into land that had been uninhabitable for 200 years. Wood's pumps didn't just drain the city, they built the modern New Orleans. But every solution has a price. And the price of the wood screw pump was something nobody predicted. Here is the irony at the heart of New Orleans. The levees that held the river back also prevented the natural sediment that had replenished the land for thousands of years. The drainage pumps that dried out the city also caused the organic soil to compact and sink. Every engineering victory made the city more livable and more vulnerable. New Orleans is now a bowl. Parts of the city sit as much as 15 feet below sea level, surrounded by walls of water on every side. The Mississippi River flows above the rooftops of some neighborhoods, held back only by those levees. The very systems that saved the city in the 1800s created the conditions that would threaten it more than a century later. But that is also why New Orleans survives. It has always been a city that builds itself out of disaster. Fire gave it brick, flood gave it higher levees, disease gave it drainage pumps, and architecture designed for air. Every crisis forced an answer. And those answers are still standing, still working, still shaping one of the most extraordinary cities on earth.